so much innovation happening in Africa that can benefit places outside of Africa. So we look to like cross-fertilize the experience that we have outside of Africa with what we've been learning from the people working in Africa.
Hello and welcome to yet another episode of the Geospatially Africa podcast, the podcast for the African geospatial community. In today's episode, I'll be talking with Todd Slind. Todd is Locana's Open Data and Development Unit Business Lead. And Locana is a Washington-based geospatial consultancy that help organizations maximize the power of locational intelligence. Locana happens to have done quite a number of projects in the African space over the years, from business to NGOs and humanitarian action, and they use quite a lot of open source data and software. And this would form the basis of today's episode, so I hope you sit back, relax, and enjoy as you listen. Thank you so much, Todd, for joining us today. You are Locana's Open Data and Development Unit Business Lead, and you've come a long way to hold such a position within a company like Locana. Tell us, did you start in the geospatial field, or did you just sort of find yourself in it, so to say?
Well, I got my start in university. I asked my advisor what are the tools that I would need to be a good professional when I started my career, to make sure that I was ready for what was to come. And I was studying civil engineering in university. My advisor, he said, you really need to check out this thing, GIS. It's going to be very big. So this was some years ago. We've had GIS for a long time now. But when I was in university, I got the great advice to learn before I left university about GIS and learn how to apply it to different types of problems. So that's how I got my start. And I've since, I started in transportation. It was the field that I did geospatial work in. And then I've been able to work along other different industries and domains and helping to solve different problems.
Yeah, and that's one thing I really like about the GIS tool, so to say, in any career development. So it's something that's applicable across board. And you personally seem to have been able to apply it in different sectors, like from even Locana's portfolio in Africa. You've gone from business, mapping financial services to hazards and humanitarian development and all that. That's the beauty of the geospatial career. You get to work in different sectors, and for some people that get bored, this could be the best thing, because you can just apply the same set of skills across different sectors. So yeah, Locana is a big deal currently in the geospatial field, and I know you've done so much in the African space. What do you think Locana aims to achieve with the African geospatial industry or this African geospatial space? Because I think going through what you've done, you've had the ability to do so many projects across the African generally, both in sub-Saharan Africa and even in MENA. And you're kind of like a trend-setting consultancy agency for geospatial technologies in Africa. So what's the aim really for the African geospatial space?
Well, I think we focus on helping with international coordination. So a lot of times our customers are based outside of Africa, but want to make investments in Africa. They want to find out more about what Africa has to offer in terms of developing new markets, to help with problems that may exist, with respect to climate change or lack of access to services, and just to generally kind of, raise livelihoods, across the world. So, what we have learned in our time working in Africa is that there's so much innovation happening in Africa that can benefit places outside of Africa. So we look to cross-fertilize the experience that we have outside of Africa with what we've been learning from the people working in Africa. So that oftentimes means that, we'll bring some things like open standards that have been developed by the international community but really focused in the US or Europe, and they have a lot of benefits for making things interoperable and open and accessible. But then we learn about these amazing things that are happening in Africa around mobile first, or being online, offline, and very secure about it, and doing a lot to democratize technology so that it's very, very usable for the end user, and all you need is your mobile, and you can take advantage of data and applications and technology. So I guess to summarize, we're looking to help make connections internationally, and we love to connect up Africa-based companies with the customers that we work with, and partner with those companies to help develop creative solutions, but also to sustain them, because we don't have much of a presence. We don't have a permanent presence in Africa right now, but we really like to make sure that we partner with people that can take things on that we can't continue because we don't live there, and then really looking to learn as much as we can so that we can benefit from all the great work that's done in Africa, that others that we work with outside of Africa can benefit from.
Yeah, that's a beautiful answer. And even looking at some of the work that you've done already, we're talking about a lot of projects, and some people might not know really. Although a quick glance at your website would give you a lot of information on what Locana is doing in Africa. But then could you just enlighten us on some of your recent projects that Locana has done within the African space? I, as a Nigerian, kind of identify with some of your projects, although not very recently. But I would just like you to say a bit of some of the new things that you're doing in the space, and some of the things that we can look forward to in Africa that Locana is contributing to.
Okay. Yeah, so we've been doing a lot of work with OpenStreetMap, if you're familiar with that. It's a free and open map of the world for everyone. Exactly. So there's a lot of work that can be done on top of OSM to do really all kinds of different things. Some of the work that we've been doing recently is around looking at the viability of solar microgrid development. So looking at rooftops and looking where buildings are in villages, and understanding their connectivity to existing electrical networks, and figuring out where it makes sense to go in and invest in a microgrid. So helping kind of with the electrification of rural areas in several different countries. And then we also have helped working, and that's for a private company. And then kind of again in the private space, we work with companies that want to source agricultural products from Africa. So looking at where they can find citrus fruit, for example, that then can be kind of aggregated, processed, kept cold, and then moved to market, and then eventually shipped to export markets in Europe and other places. So that is a really interesting geospatial problem, where you're looking at, where are the sources of the fruit, and then what are the routes that are most efficient to get that fruit to market, and then from market, how to get it to a processing facility and where to locate that facility. So it's really kind of a whole value chain kind of mapping. And some other things that we've been working on in I would call it kind of the third sector, or the social benefit space, large NGOs and donor organizations. It's bringing together a lot of data that help kind of paint the picture of where climate change is going to have the most impact, and then figuring out where areas exist that don't have the adaptive capacity to deal with that impact very well. So focusing investments on areas that are going to be greatly impacted by climate change, and then helping to get policies in place and resources in place to help those communities adapt. And that is kind of taking the form of a web-based tool to look at a map and then filter out areas that you might be most interested in. If you're interested in livestock, if you're interested in agricultural commodities, if you're interested in cash crops, those sorts of things. And then if you're interested in things getting more dry, things getting more wet, more extreme weather events, kind of looking at what are the issues that you are most interested in working on, and where are those issues most severe, and where are the people that are going to be most impacted, and how can you help them best. So those are the things that we're doing kind of right now in the current times. And then kind of in the not too distant past and fairly recently, we've worked in the areas of humanitarian assistance to refugee population, so helping to figure out where folks are migrating to and from, and what services they need to be safe and be fed and get to where they're going, and have the supports they need to do that safely and successfully. And then we're also working in recently we worked in the area of financial access. So we did a lot of work to working with a bunch of different Africa-based organizations to map where financial access points exist, and then combine that with population data to identify gaps where financial access needed improvement. And oftentimes that financial access was being improved with mobile money. So there was an element of like looking at the coverage from the mobile network operators, and then looking at the existing financial networks. So looking at brick and mortar banks, at SACO locations, at ATMs, and like figuring out like where the central bank can encourage development of financial service access, and then how to also affect policy and put incentives in place so that mobile network operators can really play a big role in helping people get access to the ability to make remittances, the ability to make savings deposits and withdrawals, the ability to purchase insurance, and all the financial services that they need to conduct their lives. So that was another thing we did a lot of. And then we've also worked in other aspects of agriculture and helping to figure out kind of where different crops might be best suited to be grown, and what kind of supports are in place to make those things happen, like agro dealers and how to distribute seeds and fertilizers and whatnot. So a lot of interesting stuff recently and currently, and I could talk more about all that stuff, but I'll let you ask the question.
I know you can. You sound very excited when you start talking about the project, and even I am excited because this is something that a lot of people, especially in this part of the world, are just getting to know. Like the average person on the street really doesn't know what GIS is. Like if you say you're in the geospatial sector, they don't know what they say. Like what is it? But then these things really impact our lives generally. Like for example, in Nigeria, something you said about the financial accessibility and agency-based banking and all that. Most Nigerians these days they just know that, there's a POS, there's a mobile agent that they can go to. Most people, and this has really helped to reduce the stress on the major banking sector, but it's also, helped to give people better access, that they can just get money anytime they want to, just behind their houses. And it's empowered people and giving them jobs, to be agents. There's Access Closer, there's Paga, there's all that. And as in Nigeria now, listening to me will be like, so these things, were made possible by geospatial technology. And yes, that's basically what we're trying to preach, using, this platform and all that to let people know that even their lives really revolve around geospatial technology, even though they do not know. I know that Locana uses a lot of open source technology and data. And even as you have mentioned, you're working with OpenStreetMap data. Now, I also know that Locana supported the State of the Map conference. Tell us about Locana's involvement with that. I know you use a lot of data from OpenStreetMap, so it really makes sense. But then how did that come about, and why do you believe so much in the OpenStreetMap's vision?
Yeah, so we've been working with OpenStreetMap for about 10 years, and we first started using it for what we call our traditional GIS analysis projects, where we're being asked to solve a problem with maps. And then we got involved in the humanitarian assistance space, working with the Red Cross and others like the humanitarian OpenStreetMap team to build tools to help them expand the use of OpenStreetMap into post-disaster situations. So we helped build a tool based on OpenStreetMap called OpenMapKit, which uses OpenDataKit, but builds on some specific components that are useful for capturing OSM data. And we also helped build like a server called Portable OpenStreetMap that allowed these organizations to take OSM out into the field in a post-disaster situation where there was no electricity, no internet, no anything, but they could have this kind of a Wi-Fi access point that people that were collecting data and updating maps could all be kind of working together and updating the map in the field, so that people that were out there could be looking at a map in real time and seeing what was happening. Like, so there were damaged buildings being flagged, there was flooded areas being drawn, there were all kinds of things that were needed to be considered when they were deciding what actions to take to address the situations. And then so that's how we got involved in OSM, is first kind of using it because it was the best available source for our projects, and then we were lucky to get involved in some of the people that were really driving the adoption of OSM in the humanitarian sector. And since a few years ago, OSM adopted a new data license, the Open Database license, that opened up a lot of opportunity for private companies to get involved with OSM. So we've been lucky to work with private companies to build tools to help increase the pace at which OSM is being completed, and then helping OSM be kept up to date, and for the quality to continue to improve. So we really feel like OSM and OpenStreetMap is this amazing way to have everybody on the planet, kind of working from the same map, understanding things in a consistent way. And because it's local, and because it's, the people that are mapping, can be mapping their own local communities, it really has the opportunity, I should say, to reflect, what the people living there want to have seen on their map. So it doesn't have to be, made from a map made by somebody who's never actually visited the place and doesn't know what's important to that local community. You can really kind of represent your community the way you would like to on the map, and focus on the priorities that are important to your community. And we love the fact that there is a very strong focus on, being involved with the entire planet with OSM. So there's a lot of well-supported regional conferences, and we just want that to keep happening, and we want more people to be brought to the OSM community. We've also worked in the past with Youth Mappers, which is a great program that trains university students on how to use OSM and just mapping skills in general, and we look to those folks to help us with projects from time to time. And we just think it's a great movement that is going to bring benefit and an opportunity to everybody on the planet who needs a map and wants to have a map that's consistent and they know is reflective of the community.
Yes, and that's beautiful. Like, one of the really major benefits of the OSM project is like the fact that like local people, like you said, can represent what they want on their maps. Although in most recent times, it's known that the fact that crowd mapping is a thing. Most people from all over the country, all over the world, can map places they've never been to, which is also something. And there's also the critique about like accuracy of the data on OSM, and it's beautiful to see that you are working also to better improve OSM map and even like the benefits of it as well. So yeah, that's beautiful. And we've really been seeing in recent times, the occurrence of new data types and, new software and all that. Like, how has the convergence of new data types, new expectations, and new demands altered the geospatial world, in your opinion, like compared to like years back? And thankfully, you've been practicing in this field for, many years, so you can really tell like the differences between how things were done when you started and how things are today, and like how do you see these new data types and new things affecting the geospatial world in general, really, and even also in Africa particularly.
Yeah, so I think that there's a lot of really interesting work being done to promote new standards in like the imagery, like the GIS raster data, so satellite imagery, other remote sensed imagery from aerial capture and drones and so forth. And there's so much of that data now coming online, and there's formats that make it very efficient to serve out through cloud native kind of methods and microservices. And because it's being refreshed so frequently, we can now like look at things over time a lot more easily. So there's a bunch of new satellites up in the sky. There's a bunch of new technologies that are giving us different ways to interpret that imagery. There's artificial intelligence that's helping us extract features from that imagery and identify patterns and changes that we can take closer looks at. But I think that the really challenge, I guess the opportunity that I see with all these new data types and kind of new expectations for data being current, data being high resolution, the picture being very clear, is really like figuring out how to make the experience usable for people, because a lot of people that are used to working with GIS and data, it's just exciting that there's more data available because they're used to it and know how to kind of adapt to the increased volume and the change that the new data types represent. But for others that aren't kind of native map users or are learning to use maps as a kind of a new thing, they can be overwhelmed by the data and by all of the volume of the data that they need to sort through and filter out. So I think it's really going to be a challenge to like figure out how to really, from a mobile first kind of approach, how to distill all that data down into really usable forms and present it to people in ways that it's helping them get the answers to the questions they're asking of that data. And, just because we have a ton of data, we don't want to push all that data out to end users. We really want to like be smart about how we interpret that data and transform it into insight, into knowledge, into learnings, into something that's actionable for someone from day to day. Because it's now so good that it's not like we used to have to kind of do a lot of modeling of data. Like we had to fill gaps, we had to interpolate data, we had to downscale data, we had to extrapolate data. But now we have a lot of data that's more in kind of the measured state and not the modeled state. So it's a lot of like observations that we can use to provide real-time insight at very specific locations that could really be used to help people make daily decisions, and not like long range decisions where the data is kind of fuzzy, so we can't really be sure. So let's make a small kind of this decision now, and then we'll learn more later when we'll make a bigger decision. I think we have the ability to really build applications and tools to help people make decisions that affect their daily lives, and not just high level decisions that affect government policy.
Exactly. And what you said about like the abundance of data now, kind of makes it necessary, to have analysis ready data, and like that's the field where most of the remote sensing experts are coming in to try to make sure that this abundance of data can be consumable to the average man on the street. Not that there's so much data, so that's why the innovations in analysis ready data, like I said, and even semantically looking through data to find the information and storing that and making it consumable for decision makers, like you said. And yes, like I really agree with that, as that's the next challenge now, is finding the information and not just the data. We've gone past the days where data was so expensive, especially remotely sensed data, that you just had to use one image a year or something. Now you have multiple images per day that are very high resolution, and then it's the place of now the analysts and like consultants like yourself to find how to compress that information, that data, and make it into easy bits of information for decision and policymakers that are not used to it. So yeah, definitely I agree with what you said. And yes, and it's a challenge really even for us in the, the geospatial field generally, like the workers and the consultants and the business owners and all that.
Yeah, it's a good problem because you get to be creative. Yeah, it's fun.
Exactly. Yeah, you get to be creative and you don't have to have the constraint of not enough data. Now there's so much data. Yeah. So yeah, what's your view on open source and proprietary geospatial data and software? Because, as a commercial enterprise, how would you correlate your use of open data? You use open data, you don't have to pay for the data. So how do you say there's balance there between being a commercial enterprise using heavily open source data?
Well, I personally believe that the only data that should not be open is data that needs to be protected for security, which is usually like critical infrastructure data, personal identity information, things that if they get into the wrong hands, it could cause serious harm. So I think that the standard, or the people's first thought should be that this data should be open unless it meets one of those tests or criteria. When we approach problem solving, we want to bring the best available technology, software, data to help solve the problem. So we don't think proprietary versus open first. We really let's understand the requirements. Let's understand what the end user needs. Let's understand what the capacities of the organization that we're working with are for taking on, if they want to take on proprietary software. Do they have the budgets going forward to pay the licensing? Are they committed to GIS for the long term? Are they going to be having a lot of analysts that are working from the same data? I mean, it kind of always needs to be requirements driven when we do make that decision, because if you're looking at building a GIS department within a big organization, then that really points you to proprietary, because you have the whole stack of software and tools that can support all different types of use cases that you might have within that organization. If you're really looking for something specific, then it's mainly being done on the web, maybe putting a locator map on a website so people can find where your branch offices are, or building something that's really project based that doesn't need to have a lot of kind of long-term support, or need to be built so that it can scale to serve 100 million people at the same time. Then it makes more sense to do something that's using open source tools, because open source tools are typically lighter weight. They typically can be more componentized so that you can only take the bits of technology that you want and not take the whole stack or the whole big, proprietary package. So it really, in my mind, I have a bias towards open, because I think that, it's great to build things that a lot of people can benefit from. And a lot of the clients that we work with have it as a requirement. So when we work with a big donor organization or a big government organization, they are asking us to build global public goods, and those need to be open and those need to be accessible to everyone on the planet. So when we kind of come at it, we really like to understand, well, what's the long-term view of how this is going to be used, and who's going to be using it, and is this the start of a more formal GIS function, or is this the start of a kind of a one-off project that doesn't need quite so much infrastructure behind it. And generally, if you're going to be doing something that's very highly customized for your use case or for your particular problem that you're trying to solve, then that would point more towards open source. And if you're looking for something that's fairly straightforward, a very understandable and kind of traditional GIS problem to solve, then that would go more towards a proprietary, because that kind of model is used to like solving the same problems over and over and building software that does that very well. Whereas the open source is tends to be more, like I mentioned, lighter weight and adaptable to unique use cases that require a custom approach.
Yeah, that's really the point with open source and proprietary data, and the fact that open source data, like you said, most data, like all data, should be open source, and this is something that I've seen adapted all over the world, but Africa is just coming up to that level, and even with the advent of the digital earth, Africa, at least we know remotely sensed data is becoming even more accessible. But then there's also the case of like socio-economic data and data such as transport networks and all that, which we're really just trying to come on board with. And yeah, like you said, like proprietary data, proprietary software, then that's the case for proprietary software, is the fact that most people tend to go towards even open source, but then there's still the use cases for proprietary software because they tend to be more advanced and more capable to do a lot of so many different things. And you said, yeah, so big corporations and organizations would maybe definitely maximize the use of that. Now, how is Locana promoting an open and freely accessible catalog for data and people using this data? Because I know this is something that it's a thing now at Locana, and it's a project you're working on. Could you tell us a bit more about this?
Yeah, so what we try to do is build our application architecture so that they have open architectures where we have like a data tier that's accessible via API, so that we could theoretically expose that API, and anyone who would want access could be granted access directly to the data through the API. So making it so that people can get directly to the source or the raw or the primary data is one of our principles that we try to follow, and that always depends on our client and what their requirements are. A lot of the projects that we build that are like decision support tools that have like literally hundreds or sometimes thousands of different data layers, we encourage our customers to build a data catalog interface so that we build a separate metadata database that makes all of those data layers searchable, filterable. We make sure that there's like a thumbnail available so that people can see the extent and kind of see the contents of the data set, so that they know, kind of do a visual check to like, oh yeah, that's the data I'm looking for. But then we also encourage our customers to build what we call an explore experience. So not only do we want to provide a discover experience, which is kind of the data catalog and being able to search through keywords, filter by date, filter by theme, filter by geography, but then, after you've kind of seen that data in that thumbnail view and just getting a static image of it, can you go in and interrogate that data by doing some simple, kind of point and click and finding out what the values are and confirming that the contents of that data are adequate to meet your needs. So, we advocate for whenever the data are open in our projects, we advocate for those types of experiences so that when we have been asked by a customer to assemble this fantastically valuable library of data, we build those tools to make it accessible to a wide audience. And since we've done these types of projects a lot of times, we can generally kind of build those experiences fairly quickly by reusing code, by following patterns that are well established, and using open standards and metadata protocols, and not recreating the wheel, but really making it kind of another node of an open data environment or ecosystem that people who are used to discovering data online can find access to and really easily find what they're looking for.
Could you discuss a bit about what Locana is seeing globally and in Africa? What trends can you look out for, both in terms of public and private sector involvement in development and the application of geospatial technology and data?
Sure. Yeah. So, one of the things that we're seeing a lot of is people ready to take action around climate change and looking to how to adapt to a changing climate. And that is happening in our private sector clients where they're looking to adapt their supply chains to different patterns of agricultural productivity. So as the climate changes, the environment in certain areas, certain crops are going to be more viable than others, and so they want to stay ahead of that and know that if they're not going to be able to source coffee from the same state in Central Africa, then they need to source it from a different state where they're starting to cultivate coffee because the climate has become more beneficial to that crop. So I think there's a lot of value in local knowledge for, agricultural commodities and where those can, be grown, which is that's a very complicated problem because you have issues of land ownership and land use compatibility and supporting infrastructure, which not only roads, but like agri dealers and training centers. And there's a lot of infrastructure that goes around kind of moving an agricultural pattern, if you will, within the ecosystem. But I think in general, like climate change and agriculture is a big area, and the local knowledge needed to make sure that those decisions are the right ones is very key. Another thing that we're seeing, and this is in more the donor international NGO space, is helping to support monitoring, evaluation, and learning. This is, again, an area where local knowledge is absolutely critical. So investors want to make sure that the projects that they're supporting are achieving the intended outcomes. So monitoring, evaluation, and learning is a component of that is the on-the-ground field work that goes out to measure the change, observe the change, and to report that back so that tweaks can be made to a project or a strategy, and that the kind of there's a feedback loop so that the investments that are being made are actually effective. And then I think that there's a lot of opportunity in what we call place matching, and we have some ideas around using like social media data and using socio-economic data and using points of interest data to really characterize locations that people find that match their lifestyle preferences. So we see like a lot of people since the pandemic kind of feeling like they have more ability to move around. I moved during the pandemic because my job didn't require that I went to an office anymore, and we see that kind of across the globe. So we're building tools to take people's preferences in through a quick quiz and then show them different locations that, based on their answers, might be really compatible to where they might want to live or find a new job or raise a family or just have a better opportunity space for recreation or meeting people or going to school or whatever the case may be. So I think beyond that, there's a lot of, like, when I look at the commercial mapping industry, I'd say that the base map pieces have been commoditized and largely standardized on OSM. So there's still value in doing OSM, but that's going to be kind of volunteered information, I think, going forward, just kind of the core OSM stuff. But the big mapping services are looking for points of interest data because that's really where they differentiate, and that's kind of the proprietary piece for their base map. So that's what if you go into a map and you see a business on a map, you click on that and there may be some details about the business, but that sort of thing, like making sure that all of the points of interest are on the map and making sure that those things are kept updated, there is value to be had there. And when big companies are looking to source that data, they're willing to pay for it because it has significant economic value. So capturing that kind of data, and if you want to be a data provider, that would be a really interesting place to go. And it kind of goes back to the origins of some of the earliest geospatial companies and that I was aware of in Africa were building these business listings and going around and and talking to individual businesses and they would subscribe to that map. I think that same kind of business model might exist again because there's so many more companies that are looking for that data and are willing to pay for it.
Well, that's a very good angle to it that I personally hadn't thought about, but then it brings to mind some of the analysis that we're doing, like you said, those points of interest data and keeping them updated. Although it's a very big deal, it's valuable information, like you said. And then it's even beneficial to even the businesses themselves, because personally, in my interaction with certain local businesses, back in Nigeria, like I've been able to access businesses just by going through like the maps, and then some of them even make better sales because of the fact that they are on a map. And this is something that if most businesses knew about, no matter how local, no matter how small scale, it even helps them also to grow. And even apart from gathering the information, it's up to us, people like us, like evangelists of the geospatial sector like us, to influence people to know the benefits of being on a map or being spatially aware as a business also. So yeah, that's a really good angle and also even pointing to the fact that you said something about monitoring and evaluation and it being like a local thing that like local people would have to do to validate what international organizations are doing. And also I know that you are an international organization. So do you work with local organizations to maybe achieve things like this? And also even in Africa and Nigeria where you're so vibrant, your work is, are you maybe seeing in some time now having a permanent presence in an African country or something, so like having like a physical presence and maybe like employing some of the local talents or geospatial talents or people to be part of Locana? Is it something we can look forward to in near future, or you're okay with just taking up some consultants and some local organizations to do the local work?
Well, I think we would prefer to work with partners, and we do have partners in Africa that we've worked on projects with, and we work with both like individual contributors that we find, so that can serve a role on a project and contribute. Like we had on one project, we had a database architect that worked with us that was based, in the same city as the client was, and they helped us design the database. They did all the requirements gathering, and then we collaborated on the rest of the application. And that was, a person that just we got contacted through some of our university contacts and did a great project. We also have, work with small firms that are I would consider startups. And that's kind of what we have a bias towards because we kind of have a startup mentality. So our cultures are very compatible that way. And so we've worked with startup companies to, do everything from training to software development to data gathering to, just running conferences and doing workshops and all kinds of different things. And what we used to do and probably should think about doing again is we would go into different cities that we knew had startup hubs, and we would have unconferences at the startup hubs that were called WordCamp Africa. And what we were intending to do was just get together the community of people that were already working with geospatial, but also people that were curious about it. So we would have a good mix of people that were coming to talk about their own projects and capabilities, and then we would bring in some other folks, like we would bring in technology companies, and we would bring in people from our client organizations that we're working with, so that we were making connections, but also we were making relationships that we could then use when we had project work, and we could work with in delivering. And another model that we've kind of done is a lot of times if it's a big project for an international NGO that is kind of a long-term investment for them and they want it to be sustained going forward, is that they'll find a host organization to take over. So that is usually either like a government entity or it's a local NGO that's created to take on the work going forward. So we've done a lot of kind of handoffs and spent weeks kind of doing side-by-side training and technology transfer. But we love to have partners involved from the start. And it's sometimes a challenge to keep these relationships going because people move, they change what their career direction is, and our work tends to be project based, so it comes and goes. Once the project's done, there may be a gap until the next one. So for us, it was like really great to work through partners that we develop very strong trust relationships with and understand clearly kind of how the division of work can be done, and so that we are giving both kind of the things that they can do very well, but also opportunities to grow and go in the direction that they would like to, and use our work as opportunities to move forward. So I think that to answer your question, we're totally interested in partnerships first, and then if it makes sense for us, because we have so much work going on that we need a presence just to coordinate, then that would be the only case that we would. And even when we did have a lot of projects going on in Africa, or when we do, we tend to like piggyback on other partners' facilities. So we kind of camp out in somebody else's office or something like that. So yeah.
Okay, thank you for that.
No, it's been great. I really appreciate the opportunity to talk with you, and I really have enjoyed answering your questions.
Thank you.